Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of Understanding Propaganda. I am your host, Cory Hughes, and if you are listening to this today, I have to assume that you are already familiar with some of my work, and if you're not, I appreciate your joining me here today. So to give you a little background, I was a police officer from 2005 through 2014. And I hold degrees in public administration, criminal justice, crime scene technology. And I've got extensive experience in research and investigations thanks to my former life as a police officer. Since leaving police work, I have found a great amount of joy in studying history, particularly the Kennedy assassination. So, if you're not familiar with my work on Kennedy, I spent about 3 years full-time putting in 12 to 14-hour days, almost 7 days a week. And one of the overwhelming themes that I kept running across, which many of you will be able to relate to, is the fact that the official narrative, the historical perspective, is really just nothing more than a huge propaganda campaign that started, actually, I could argue, before the Kennedy assassination itself. And then when you really start to come to understand the totality of the Kennedy assassination, you realize that the psychological warfare aspect and the propaganda and the rumors that surround the assassination are integral in creating the understanding that most people have, even the conspiracy people. And then the further back you dig, you realize that these techniques of influencing mass opinion didn't start with Kennedy. They started a long time before Kennedy. You can go back to the Greek and Roman empires, and you can find examples of propaganda. But for the purposes of this show, which is to kind of highlight propaganda in the modern era, we really are going to start in the 1930s. And we're going to start, obviously, with Adolf Hitler and the Nazis and Goebbels and the OSS. And we're going to cover the real history of propaganda in as far as how it relates to society today. Because trust me when I tell you, the vast majority of things that people in general believe about world history are blatantly and provably false. The understanding of the world that most people have, that we learned in school and college and written and through books that we've read, is mostly garbage, particularly World War II. And we will cover World War II in depth over time. Today, what I wanted to do was cover, not only today in the next couple episodes, probably the first 3 or 4 episodes, we're really just going to cover the history of propaganda. We're going to talk about rumor and the government's role in spreading rumor. And ultimately, propaganda and rumor both contribute to what one would call psychological warfare. And we are just completely inundated with psychological warfare from our own government, not even from opposing governments. You would think that in 2021, that we would just be getting hammered with propaganda from China and Russia and all these different places that we say are our enemy. But the reality is all the propaganda is coming through Washington, D.C., primarily through the Central Intelligence Agency. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of the basics of propaganda, the Wikipedia definition, some of the earlier implementations in America in the 20th century of propaganda. But once we get through with that, we are going to begin with Goebbels, because Goebbels, who was the propaganda minister of Nazi Germany, he, to this very day, is hailed by researchers as probably the expert in propaganda, which Goebbels' principles eventually led to the teachings within the OSS and the PWE, that's the British Political Warfare Executive, that really went on to shape how modern day propaganda is done. So Let's get started with the Wikipedia definition. I love Wikipedia because it's always the official story. It's always what we're supposed to think, right? So Wikipedia is a good place to go for a foundation